But the question, I think, before all of you, all of us, is how do we educate not all our children, but every child in the state in the most cost-effective manner? And that's what my career has been about. And so I want to talk today about contextualizing the argument for choice in what I've heard is the ostensible reasoning and well-versed reasoning for Act 46, the ideas of equity, opportunity, and economic efficiency. And I want to say first, the word equity I think has been misused. Equity is not equality. And we've been using the word equality as equity, or particularly at the high school level, putting students in the same place works if everybody's coming from the same place. We all start at the same starting line, then equality works. But equity means giving people more what they need to have a fair shot at success. And that means often different things for different kids. So to tell you about Compass a little bit, I think, I've learned over the years, most people have a pretty simplified view of high school options in America. On one side, there's comprehensive public high schools that are largely open to all kids, and the other are elite prep schools. And as hopefully you know, and you can tell from today's testimony, there's a whole range of Vermont in between that are schools that serve kids in different ways, that are open to diverse kids, that are not elite, that are not highly selective or selective at all in the case of Compass. And so Compass has been around now 17 years. Again, we aim to be a model of public school choice, and we mean to complement, to work side by side with our public schools to serve those kids who aren't successful and would be costly to educate and have struggled in the public school setting. We have over 50% of our kids are on free reduced lunch, over 20% historically with special ed, again, as our mission statement says, reflective of our local demographic. We educate kids for thousands of dollars less per pupil than the public schools. We have a virtually 100% graduation rate, 90+% of our kids are accepted into colleges. I think many of those kids, first-time family college attenders. And most importantly, I think, as the young said, these kids are thriving and blossoming and not just getting by. So Compass offers hope and expands opportunities when the local public middle schools and high school isn't working for an individual. And just to give you one example of a kid we have, was in a kid who was academically struggled in school, was below grade level, got Lyme's disease, and had to be out of school for about 6 months, and the public school again did a wonderful job reaching out with a tutor coming to his home. He had night terrors and his anxiety increased because of the Lyme disease. Returned to school, a 1-grade class with kids, and the group of boys in class put acetone in his milk, among other bullying. The school claimed, as they are supposed to under law, we can provide him a free and appropriate education with accommodations. The parents said, you cannot do that. Those same group of boys are still going to be there. They had a fight, and the district fought them with arbitration in the courts and spent a lot of money to prevent him from going to Compass that was cheaper than their per child costs and on the way to the father's work. And like the Youngs, the district eventually agreed to put him in a public middle school in the opposite direction from where his parents worked that would have cost $4,000 or $5,000 more than Compass would have cost. And the parents eventually won that. But that kid now is thriving at our school without needing special ed services he's going to need, and with where he works for his family and allows him to get the kind of supports and be in a small environment that works better for him than his previous school. So we know there are a lot of kids with what we would identify risk factors in school. We know, one thing, down where we live, over 50% of the kids are on free reduced lunch. 20% plus are on special ed. One statistic I don't think a lot of people talk about, 1 in 4 kids in high school, from what I've read, have a diagnosable, hospitalizable mental health disability in the 4 years of their adolescence. Those kids are tough to have in schools, and that's a quarter of the kids. I just heard the youth risk behavior, you might have heard yesterday, 20% of the kids are express suicidal thoughts. So we already have those kind of kids, and we know those, and those kids, but those are just kind of the tip of the iceberg, the diversity of kids we face. We have all sorts of, as the parents said, quirky kids who are different from the norm, different from the mainstream, dress funny, have different views, learn different ways, have attention, emotion issues, things like that. So when I think of at-risk kids, I'm not talking about just these kids who are the most difficult. And in fact, our schools do a fairly good job with the most difficult kids when they get to that point, or at least we spend a lot of money on them. So if a kid's in enough trouble around us, where we live, they go to Kindle Farm at the cost of somewhere around $50,000 per kid. But a kid has to fail to that point before they get the kind of supports they need. Special ed, again, does a very good job of giving services kids are identified, but not every kid qualifies for special ed who is what I would call near special ed. They still need support, but they might not meet the gateways. So there's all these other kids that, like the parents call, what I call quirky kids. They're misfits. They're kids who struggle with their home life. They may struggle with relations with peers. They learn differently. Their bodies work differently in confined spaces. They may be very creative. They may be questioning of gender, sexuality. They may be a little oppositional, like about 90% of teenagers. You know, they're kids who are just like, they're different from what the system works best with. And these kids are potentially expensive to educate, and they're expensive to our society if they're not successful in school. And these kids need not equal, but they need something different that works for them to be successful in school. And I want to make clear, in no way am I saying are these not good kids. I love these kids. They're often creative, they're often very bright, they're often wicked smart, sometimes in not school smart ways. They often make bad choices. But they're insightful, clever, interesting kids, and they deserve the chance to be successful too. I want to make a point just here, you know, that I think is really important when we talk about choice. We distinguish between middle school and high school and elementary schools. I think this quirkiness, there's time in elementary school to, elementary developmentally is partly about norming and becoming part of the group. But by 6th grade or 8th grade, some of these kids have figured out in their own heads, I don't fit. Especially in Vermont, where we have typically around us often 1 grade classes, that the kids figured out, this group of kids, I don't like being with. Sometimes it's legitimate bullying, sometimes it's just self-identified, but the kid's not successful at that peer group. Or I'm not successful in this, the way this system works, the way the public school's running isn't working for me. And when they just figured that out by 6th or 8th grade, another 4 or 6 years of that is not going to change them. And so they become hopeless, and that was the word that was used in the risk behavior survey, hopeless to the point of being suicidal. They can't see another 4 or 6 years being around that same group of kids who they struggled with up to this point. And again, that's expensive to try to figure out how to accommodate. So Compass was founded in 1999 largely to serve these kind of quirky kids who don't fit in elsewhere. And here I just want to talk about one of the misperceptions that the Turners were good about speaking to, about the misperception of independent schools. 2 misperceptions, I would say. One, which I think is really distressing, I think the underlying sense sometimes, and I say this as a lifelong Democrat and liberal, that independent schools, I hope it's not heresy, independent schools is clear, they're not better. And please take that with context here. It's not that they're worse, they're different. People aren't going to flee to independent schools because you offer choice. The people who flee are families like the Turners, where it's just too hard for their kid. And so I think it's important. And the other thing that many private schools in the state are not elitist, if only because we don't have enough rich people in Vermont. So we take those other kids not just because we need to, but because of a lot of educators I know down near us. Almost every independent school head was a public school principal previously. There are a lot of independent schools in the state are specifically targeted not at the elite cherry-picking kids, but at those kids who are struggling elsewhere, and how else can we provide opportunities for them to succeed. So when I look at kids at Compass, why kids choose Compass, and I would say most independent schools, what's the number one single reason is they're not successful elsewhere. If they were successful elsewhere, they would stay. So these are not cherry-picked. These are kids for some reason are leaving something that's not working. But the most common attribute of kids that say at our school is probably anxiety. That's a tough one, and we see it in lots of ways. You know, when they come to me, when they first come to our school, they look beaten down. Again, I don't blame the system. I don't think a teacher in another school told them you're bad, you can't learn. But somehow these kids by 7th grade, 9th grade, you can see it. They're really withdrawn, and they feel hopeless. Like I can't I just can't succeed in that place. And getting a fresh start and a new start is essential to their success. And you see in those kids, attributes again that the young sort of attribute, I think, low self-confidence, questioning of themselves, questioning of the system, sometimes bullied, feeling judged. Those kind of attributes. Kids, maybe they feel a little, a way to describe it is feeling small, And in fact, I would argue a lot of independent schools, I think, have smaller children. Because in bigger schools, those kids get physically lost as well as emotionally, mentally. So these kids come here, and the thing is, comprehensive public high schools are anxiety factories. The things that work for so many kids in traditional public high schools are really hard for kids with anxiety. So things like high expectations and grades and awards and punishments and that whole system that's necessary and works for a lot of adolescents, as well as the whole stimulating environment of other teens and all that stuff, is really hard for kids with anxiety. And just one example, we had a girl who came from Keene High who felt like kids talked about her negatively. It was one of her attributes of anxiety. Well, every passing period, if she only thinks 10% of the kids are looking at her, that's only 50 or 100 kids a passing period who she feels like she has to go back to class feeling like 50 or 100 kids talked about me in that little 5-minute period 8 times a day. So that makes it really hard for those kids. And it's not, again, a problem with our public schools because you can't be both things at once. You need to have those kind of structures and things like the Young said about eyes up. That works for a lot of kids. You need that kind of consistency and clarity for a lot of the kids. But for the kids that doesn't work, for like their son, then it becomes that kid's the problem kid that needs to be fixed, as opposed to that kid's a different kid that maybe needs a different environment. So here's where the economic efficiency of comprehensive schools break down. You can't be using grades as a motivator and then tell some kids grades aren't so important. You can't have really strong sports programs and tell the kids who are put off by that sports stuff and pep rallies, that's not part of what we do. And so again, it's not just about the classes, it's about the whole kind of culture of the school and the environment of the school, the consistency of the practices, that not having a school where, oh, we do all this traditional stuff, but for you, here's a couple little things different. The couple little things don't make it right, it just makes it little appendages. And the kids can tell this is the culture of the school, I'm not part of that culture, it doesn't work for me. So, you kind of get to the end here, it's easy, I think, in this meeting room when we're here to focus on schools and on individual kids. And that's part of policy making, as the chairman said, you're looking out for all the kids. But we need to remember the individual kids, and we also need to remember the unintended consequences. And while Act 46 had noble goals, in the interest of equality, I think we're going to lessen equity and opportunity, and we're likely to increase costs as individual kids who aren't served well become more and more costly to our system, needing special accommodations, special meetings, all kinds of supports. And I say this again as friends of, being an administrator myself and friends of public school administrators, the amount of time we spend with these kids and families where the system's not working for them. And in the end, oftentimes that kid still doesn't succeed, may fail to graduate. Or if they do graduate, they graduate not ready to be ready for the work beyond school. And so in the long run, I think having choice is less expensive for us as a state, provides more opportunities for kids. And then the other cost I just want to address before I leave here is, as a school board member, speaking from that side, the cost to our communities, and it sounds like I'm hearing from other parts of the state, of trying to force districts with choice to merge with districts without choice and pick one or the other, is sort of a Sophie's Choice Solomonic challenge here, that especially down near us, Windham Southeast, Windham Northeast, Windsor, we're all facing that problem. And I think in most cases, we can't be side by side because you have only one district left. You have the public district by itself, has no one to form with then. And we already have well-functioning supervisory unions. We've done everything you've asked in terms of consolidating special ed and consolidating busing and those other savings. We'll have the other savings of merging, but we can't do it if we can't do it easily without having choice and non-choice districts with the same merged district. If that could be part of the law, which I don't think it was, I think it originally was intended to be, it would be easy to have those mergers go through, and we wouldn't be pitting communities against communities in the way we're doing. That's going to end up being pretty divisive. And in the case, it sounds like some of these districts, multiple votes trying to get people to merge and having, you know, dissent among our Vermont communities. So in conclusion, you know, I want to have people think, if I can say anything, to think less about schools and think more about the school system as a whole. I think people conflate those, we often say they're the same thing. That we have a system, we can have a system, we do a system of Vermont, of the diversity of school options. We're unique in what we already offer in terms of the tech schools, our public schools, the historical academies, and independent schools where tuitioning is part of what they have. We need to keep that mix and do the best we can to most cost effectively give the opportunities for every single child to succeed. And so I hope we can work towards thinking about a system of publicly accessible choices to give each and every child the opportunity to get what he or she needs to find success in school and beyond.
Great, thanks.